We don't hear the phrase yella, yella with a southern accent, yeller, high yella anymore. To people, even people who are black who've never heard it, what does that mean?
You're not accepted. When they call you a yellow gal, it's like calling you a nigger. Maybe even worse than that, because a yellow gal means that you are not here and you're not there. You don't belong to either side. You are rejected. You're in between the cracks.
Kit?
That's not for me to decide. That's for someone who decides to live with me to decide. Not for me.
But are you willing to compromise within a relationship?
To compromise? What is compromising? Compromising for what? Compromising for what reason? To compromise for what? To compromise. What is compromise?
If a man came into your life, wouldn't you want to compromise?
Stupid. A man comes into my life and I have to compromise? You must think about that one again. A man comes into my life and you have to compromise for what? For what? For what? A relationship is a relationship that has to be earned, not to compromise for. And I love relationships. I think they're fantastic. They're wonderful. I think they're great. I think there's nothing in the world more beautiful than falling in love.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today I have a special treat for you all. This video has taken me a bit of time to make, only because we're dealing with who was known as the most beautiful and most exciting woman in the world, Eartha Kitt. Now, before we get into her story, I want to let you guys know that this will be in honor of Black History Month, not just for monoracials, but those with admixture and those who consider themselves multicultural. Because this woman is a jack of all trades, and her multicultural background and interest has led her to a life that is uncomparable to any other. She herself even said that her being Eartha Kitt was more exciting than anyone else being themselves. And we're going to get into her story and break down why she is one of the most iconic performers of our time.
I knew it before you came on.
Maybe you should.
I'm having a little difficulty at the moment. So the old disco, are you a disco goer yourself?
I am not a disco queen, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. But all those years, not those years, a couple of weeks ago, Orson Welles said you were the world's most exciting woman.
What do you mean, were?
Well, when he said it, he said you were the world's most exciting woman. If he was alive today, he'd be saying you are the world's most exciting woman.
What do you think?
Who's conducting this interview? You only married once, though. Are you picky?
Once was enough.
So our story begins in North South Carolina. A lot of people, including Eartha herself, are not sure about the date and the time and stuff that she was born, even sometimes not the location, because back in this day, there weren't a lot of medical records and stuff. So her mother, Anna Kitt, very beautiful woman, but unfortunately, she was assaulted by the slave owner's son who she worked for. She was the daughter of a slave. And that is how she was born. So Eartha's mother was biracial, meaning Eartha was MGM because her father was a black man. So a little bit after, she was around maybe the age of 4 or 5, she also had a few siblings, but her siblings were the father was like a different father, and her siblings were a lot darker than her. And there was so much ridicule around her skin tone and the fact that she wasn't 100% model racial, that she was treated differently from the rest of her siblings. And she can recall multiple people, whether it was her mother's current boyfriend or new husbands, or her family was very poor, and a lot of times they did not have food and shelter, and the mother would literally be on her knees begging just for shelter for the night, and they would say, "I don't want that yellow girl in my house." They would allow the other brown children, but not her, because of her skin tone. So this is something that she picked up very early on in her life, and it was something that has also haunted her when it comes to her experience of her blackness. So because her family was very, very poor, the mother ended up remarrying, and Eartha always had this feeling that her mother would abandon her. And one day while they were sleeping in a barn, someone had let them stay there for shelter, she wakes up and her mother is gone. And she has this undeniable fear, this feeling in the pit of her stomach that her mother will not come back. And as the sun is rising along the horizon, she sees her mother walk up to her with her dress in her hands full of fruit that she had stolen from a nearby farm to feed her children. And she got this feeling of relief, but unfortunately it did not last that long, because a little later on in Eartha's life, a couple years later, her mother remarried, and she decided that she wanted to allow Eartha to be on her own because she didn't look like the rest of the children, and nobody would accept a yellow girl, a high yellow girl. That's just the way that it was. So Eartha was dropped off with some of her extended family members who, once they realized that Eartha wasn't protected and that the mother was in and out of the home and not really being there for her, they started to physically abuse her and use her as a mule in the family to do the work and stuff like that. Mind you, she's from a farm where she said she had never seen a city before. So what she sees is all that she knows. So when she starts being abused and stuff, she tries to stick up for herself, and they notice that the mother is picking up on these things, but there's nothing she can do about it because she's at their mercy, because these are extended family members that are giving them a place to stay. And at this point, I don't know what happened, but the family had this vendetta against Eartha's mother. And one day they told her, "Come and eat dinner." And she says to them, "Well, why? It's not dinner time yet and no one else is here." And they say, "Oh, we want you to try this new seasoning." It was just red powdered dust they sprinkled over her food. And after that, she became violently ill, and she was bedridden for months. And the last thing Eartha remembers is her mother just screaming. And after that, she had passed away. Now, instead of giving this mother a regular burial, they knew that they had not only poisoned her, but did witchcraft against her as well. When the mother passed away, they took the body that in the mattress that the body was on and put it in the front yard and burnt it. And took one of Eartha's siblings, one of her youngest siblings, a darker skinned one, and took the baby and placed it back and forth, playing like monkey in the middle over the fire. Because in their minds, if you take a mother out of this world prematurely without the will of God, you're going to be cursed. And the only way to do that is to sever the connection between mother and child by placing the baby back and forth over the burial site. And that is what they did. And this signified in Eartha's mind, not just physically, but spiritually, that she was completely disconnected from her mother. And after this is when not only more physical abuse happened, but sexual abuse as well from the other children that lived in the home. So this was really one of the worst times of her life. And an extended family member, someone that lived in New York City, had visited them and saw how she was being treated. Now, this family member is married into the family, so there's nothing she could do, but she wrote to Eartha's aunt, I believe, her great aunt, and she wrote the letter and said, if you don't get her out of here, they're going to kill her. So the aunt, she sent for her, she sent money, she sent a bus ticket, and as Eartha is, getting ready to go up north and go to this new place, they're telling her, are you sure that you want to go there? In New York City, people live on top of each other, and the buildings are so big, they might fall over and crush you. Basically trying to incentivize this little girl to be afraid to leave so that they can continue to sexually and physically abuse her. And she was a mute child because of all the abuse she went through, so she just sat there quiet. And for the first time in her life, they bathed her, they did her hair, they fed her so that they wouldn't be, accused of abusing a child. And she, by herself, got on the train and found her way to New York City and met her aunt. I'm going to let you guys hear the story from her perspective because it's just a lot funnier, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how her upbringing and the way that she looked really played a part in the way people treated her.
And I think it's such a wonderful story. I think you're such a wonderful story. Because, baby, if you can make it happen, anybody can make it happen. What a beginning. We said that you grew up in the South. You were born in the South. Where in the South?
As far as we know, near Columbia. It's a little area called North. But we're not quite sure because we went back there to do the Eartha Kitt documentary. A man came into the churchyard and we asked him if he knew me. He said, yes, I know that face. He said, I know that face before that face knew its face. And, and as a result, he said that we came in from another area, but where from? I have no idea.
You think that there was a plantation owner's son who was white,
yes,
and that he raped your mother, and she was about 14 years of age.
Yes.
We don't hear the phrase yella, yella with a southern accent, yeller, high yella anymore. To people, even people who are black who've never heard it, what does that mean?
You're not accepted. When they call you a yellow gal, it's like calling you a nigger. Maybe even worse than that, because a yellow gal means that you are not here and you're not there. You don't belong to either side. You are rejected. You're in between the cracks.
So instead of thinking that being mulatto, or in Spanish, trigueño, is beautiful, instead of saying
yes, compared to being called a yellow. Because that means you're an ugly duckling and no one wants you. And you're generally, if you're, in my case, given away, then you're used as a worker. You're doing all the chores. You're the first one to wake up in the morning with this family that my mother gave me to. I was the first one to wake up in the morning, which is at the crack of dawn, which I still do until this day. I never got out of the habit. And you do all the chores that you're capable of doing at that age, and that's when you are able to walk, you start working. Because you've got to earn your way. Nobody pats you on the head and says thank you for anything.
You know, Eartha, when you hear people poor, you think of a shack in the South. You didn't have a house.
No.
You are walking in the woods and sleeping in a pile of leaves at night.
Yes.
I mean, and you said your mother wasn't carrying anything but you and your little sister Pearl.
That's right. That's
so
the
there were no clothes or luggage or belongings or backpack or anything.
No, we had absolutely nothing. That's the first scene in my life that I remembered. And that was the beginning of the book, the first book that I wrote, Thursday's Child. All I saw were cotton fields and the longest road that you ever want to picture in your whole life. And I'm probably just able to walk. And I just remember my mother and carrying my sister, half-sister actually. My half-sister is much, much darker than I am. And being rejected at every house that my mother knocked on, asking for shelter for the night at least. And it seemed to me as though when she was about to be received in the door, they saw me and they saw what color I was. And it was suddenly, no, I don't want that yellow gal in my house. So my mother was constantly on the move. Even when she went to her own relatives, her uncles, whom I think were her uncles. I'm not quite sure what the relationship was, but I heard that they were her uncles. Even they said, no, I don't want that yellow gal in my house. So even in their place, my mother put us in the barn and we slept with the animals, which was okay. I didn't, at least there was some kind of shelter. And when we were pushed out of there, so the following day, she went on and on and on, knocking on doors, and there were times we slept in the forest. She would make a bed of straw, and she would put us in there, and one morning I woke up, and I thought, sure, my mother had gone away, and she had left us in the forest. And it was such a marvelous picture, a lonely picture, and it's a picture that I will never forget. When I was thinking that my mother was gone, and now what was my sister and I going to do? Through the trees, in the morning light and the dew, I could see my mother's figure coming through the shadow, through the dew and the sunlight, and her skirt was lifted with whatever she had stolen from whatever farm she could get food. And I think it was the beginning of realizing what a happy moment is really like.
When you eat. Yeah.
When I saw my mother coming back with food instead of deserting us. But it wasn't long after that she did give us away.
She left you. And there's an image there Mother, was it that she found a man? Why did she leave you?
Well,
She must have been a child herself.
She was. And as I went through the years trying to understand, although you could never, I think, through the cracks of the wall, and my mother was on her knees in front of a fireplace, begging and pleading to this man to please accept Eartha May. And he said, no, I will not accept that yellow gal in my house. He said, but I will accept Pearl, who is my half-sister, but I will not take Eartha May. And with the crying and the sobbing, I didn't want my mother to know that I was hearing what was going on, because I didn't really talk in those days anyway. I never wanted to bring attention to myself. As a matter of fact, Sally, I've never changed. Until this day, I don't want to bring attention to myself. Eartha May, she's always hiding, except when she's on stage and all dressed up in a leather. And then she can do, you know, character. But I was silent. And it was either the next day or maybe a day or so after, I don't know, sense of timing, my mother took my sister and myself, because I heard my mother say to him, if I have to give Eartha May away, then I will give them both away, because they will at least be company for one another. But my sister was still a baby in arms, and she took us to this family who had 2 teenage children. And I saw my mother leaving on the arms of this man, and the last figure I saw of her until she died was the back of my mother walking away with this man. And sometime after that, my mother had a baby by him. And the feeling that I had that my mother had a baby by this man was something that I don't think I have ever been really able to accept. That's Almeda. She lives in Philadelphia too. I found my sisters when I became famous in New Faces at 52. But this family that she gave me to, these 2 children, not being the right color, was all they had against me.
That's all they needed.
And they tied me in a crocus sack whenever they had the opportunity, and tied me to a tree. And after sending, this was after they had sent me to a tree with a peach tree switch for them to whip my derriere until I could not sit down, until the blood was streaking down my legs and the whelps were so huge that you can't sit, you can't stand, and you cannot show anybody. And the boy was also sexually abusing me. So now how do you say this to these people? I was too shy anyway to begin with, never to bring attention to myself and to explain what was going on, which you really do not understand what is going on anyway, because if you are a rejected child and you're not wanted by this group or that group, and you are considered a nothing and nobody thinks of you as being a human being, you just want to disappear. So who would have understood, and how would I say what was going on with me? So I went through that, and also being the work mule in that family, until my aunt, my mother's sister, who lived in New York, unfortunately she's gone now too, received letters from South Carolina that told her if I was not sent for, that they would either beat me to death or starve me to death, or he had a choice of letting my mother go.
Let her go.
So he let my mother go. So my mother laid there for some months. Sometimes she would get so pain, and she would start to tell what was going on, what had gone on. Now, when she died, the neighbors saw a burning in the yard. They had taken the mattress, the children had taken the mattress, put it in the yard and started to burn it. The neighbors saw the fire. They came and started to put it out, and they saw these voodoo things in the mattress, in the center of the mattress, with letters that had come from the sisters, and that's how they found out that it was the truth of what my mother was saying. Now, if this was not so, the superstition is that if a mother with a young baby is taken away against the will of God, that the mother will come back and take the baby. Her spirit will come and take the baby. So when they buried my mother, and I was standing there watching this whole ceremony, they had to pass my young sister across the grave several times to break the line between heaven and earth and the body in the grave, so that my mother's spirit would not be able to grab the child. If my mother had died by natural causes or by the hand of God, that ritual would have never happened.
Fascinating insight to a time and a place. Let's take little Eartha Kitt and bring her up north and show her a big city for the first time. Had you ever seen a flush toilet?
I never even seen.
So unfortunately, her mother did end up passing away in a very horrific way, but the letters from her aunt ended up coming through, and she was sent to New York City, and her first day there, she told her aunt that she had to use the restroom. So her aunt guides her to the washroom, and of course, she's from the country. She's never seen a bathroom before, so she's just a little girl. She sits on the side of the tub, twiddling her legs, trying not to go on herself, and is getting to the point to where she believes she's been abandoned once again. Like, she didn't understand this was a bathroom. She thought someone was just throwing her in a closet for punishment. And her aunt comes in like, hey, what's going on? And she gestures her to the toilet and, teaches her how to use a restroom. So this was the basis of her life in New York City. She started, her aunt taught her about her admixture and how her mother was part Cherokee, Native American, and teaching her just about her culture and everything, and the fact that her mother was, a rape baby from the plantation and stuff, and her admixture about her white history, and all of these things fascinated her. She began to play piano, and she hung out with the Cuban kids in her neighborhood who taught her to speak Spanish and taught her a lot of different things. She ended up learning Dutch and German, and she incorporated learning all these different languages and being a part of all these different cultures into her music. So at this point, she's trilingual, she plays piano, she writes poetry, and she decides that she wants to get into this, I believe it's LaGuardia School of Arts now, but it was called something different at the time. And obviously, she gets accepted into the school. So one day she's, with her friends in her car in New York City, walking up and down the road, and she bumps into someone who she says has a very similar skin tone to her, and that's what made her feel so connected to this woman. Because you have to remember, like, light-skinned women and biracial and multi-generationally mixed women are a minority in the Black community, and I'm sure they were at this time. So when she saw another girl with the same skin tone as her, asking her, hey, do you know where Max Factor is? That's basically like a makeup store. Think about Mac and Sephora. That's how that was at that time. And she thinks to herself, what would a girl that looks like me be wanting to do at a makeup store? Like, because she really did feel bad about her skin tone and stuff like that. So the girl says to her, oh, it's not for me. It's for Catherine Dunham, who was a singer at the time. And she couldn't believe that this woman knew her. So she says, well, I'll take you to the store if you introduce me. And they call it a deal. So they get to the studio where Catherine Dunham is. She's getting her makeup done. And, Eartha, she has such this amazing energy that Catherine asks her, like, are you here to perform or are you here to audition? And she says, oh, no, I just wanted to meet you. And Catherine says, well, nothing's stopping you. Get on stage and show me what you got. And at the time, she just writes poetry and she plays piano, and she's not a dancer. Catherine Dunham was a dancer. So she says, I don't really know what to do. And they tell her, just do what you can do. And she asked the piano guy, there was a guy that was playing a piano, to play a Cuban song that she had learned from her friends. And she ended up singing the song in 3 different languages and just doing the dances that her friends taught her. And obviously, Catherine Dunham was blown away and told her, you're a singer, you're a dancer, you're performing with me. And this is how she got one of her big breaks. She was also in a movie with Sammy Davis Jr. He was kind of like a creep, though. He would tell her things like, oh, one day I'm going to be more famous than you. I've been doing this for over a decade and everyone knows your name but not mine. And he tried to coerce her into marrying him, and that was a common theme whenever she worked with men, unfortunately. And for the most part, those were Black men, by the way, basically being intimidated by her and wanting to own her and outshine her. And this is one of the reasons why she ended up dating a white guy, and why her daughter is multi-generationally mixed. The father is white, and a lot of stars at this time did that. Black stars would date non-black people, not only to make themselves multicultural, so they don't feel like you're like a one-trick pony, but of course so they can get rights that black people weren't able to get at the time. Also, when it came to her race and her career and the connection between the two, she was also a patriot, a proud American. And her being multicultural and learning about all these different groups of people allowed her to have an introspective, idea on American culture that a lot of not just black people, but Americans in general just weren't able to come to the conclusion with. At this time, the Vietnam War was happening, and, she was against that for reasons that obviously today we can see as reasonable. But at the time, a lot of people, they were afraid to speak out, or their brains just didn't think as quick as her. She was very ahead of her time when it came to certain things. And she talks about her career and how, because she didn't look a certain way, that sometimes they would say, oh, we have to darken your photos and darken your skin. And Lena Horne, they said the same thing to her. And I did a video on That's So Raven and Raven Simone, and how in that TV show they would tell her, stop tanning. And she says, oh, I'm sorry, I just wanted to look pretty. Because, in the early 2000s, having tan skin, that was really in. That was a beauty standard. And, if you didn't fit that standard, especially as a black girl, people would have a problem with that. So when people try to make it seem like, light skin tears and, because dark skinned girls go through a certain thing that other groups of women that don't look that way haven't had historical trials and tribulations based off being multi-generationally mixed or looking that way, it's very deceptive to pretend like you don't understand someone else's pain, So that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to make this video.
Why wouldn't I be? I mean, I went to school.
Yes.
I have a learning experience.
Yes.
But I can't imagine not being able to try to make my way here. Mm-hmm. Now, you and Dorothy Dandridge and all those folks that came before, there wasn't really an outlet for you to go and explore who and what you wanted to do in this area.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're mulatto. Because you see, and particularly now in these modern times, you have to look a certain color on the television and in the movies. Right. I did a film with Sammy Davis Jr., Ana Lucasta. I was in the running for the Academy Award. 2,500 cinemas of the United States of America wouldn't take it because I didn't look black enough on the screen, making love to a black man. And there was things that everybody said.
But then they weren't going to let you in the front door either, because maybe you were too black. You can't win.
That's right. I know, because when I first started with Catherine Dunham Ballet Company now in Las Vegas, my dear, we, as beautiful a dancers as we were, could come through the kitchen and go on stage and knock ourselves out, doing all of our wonderful things, could not come through the front door. So when I became the hot thing in the United States and all over the world, my contract said, at Las Vegas particularly, I will not work in front of a segregated audience. I used to go to Dorothy Dandridge when she was there at the same time I was. She was working at the Last Frontier or one of those frontier. I went to Dorothy. Now, Dorothy's the same color I am. And I said, Dorothy, we have to go downstairs and just walk through the lobby. She said, no, I can't do that. I don't want to be embarrassed. I said, if you're not going to take the chance of being embarrassed, we'll never be able to get us to be walking through the front door. Now, I had a special situation there because of Belden Cattleman, who owned his own place.
Right.
It was not syndicated in any way. So no matter what I wanted to do, but I didn't pay any attention to this prejudice thing. I didn't even think about it. I would go to the tables with money that Belden Cattleman gave me. He would give me $200 a night to go to the gambling table. I'd put $100 in my bosom, and then they would...
So I definitely identify with her being a patriot and loving her country and wanting what's best for it. She was actually invited to the White House on a premise of a question. The question was, why is the youth of America acting out in certain ways? And, everyone's giving all these bullshit reasons, and come to find out it was all just propaganda. Everybody was just bullshitting. But, this woman who speaks straight from her heart is trying to explain to them to identify with the youth, to understand why they're doing the things that they're doing and that they're acting out for a reason. And she was completely shunned, and this was the beginning of why her career was blackballed in America, and why she decided to use her multicultural privilege and her privilege stacking of having all these different talents to go to other countries. And that's ultimately how she became a household name. It wasn't even because of her own people, Americans.
Much bigger way than because nobody was doing it. Now, first of all, people thought that I was invited to the White House to sing my song, Santa Baby, I Want to Be Evil, Old-Fashioned Girl. That was not the case at all. I've worked with a lot of kids here in Watts, as you know, and those kids now that I was working with are now grown up, and they are working with the kids to help get them off the street. Anyway, I had 5 areas of Washington cleaned up because of that kind of thing. I knew what was happening to the poverty money, et cetera, because a group called Rebels with a Cause came to the theater when I was doing Hour on the Pussycat and told me and showed me. And I went and knocked on the door of, quote unquote, the House of Parliament. Anyway, we got this area cleaned up. So that's why I was reported to Mrs. Johnson as one of the people who help correct situations, working with the underprivileged. Anyway, 50 of us women were invited there to give our opinions as to why there is so much juvenile delinquency in the streets of America. That was the question. I kept raising my hand. Every time somebody said something, I raised my hand. Mrs. Johnson was saving me for last, it seems. Oh, first of all, I want you to know President Johnson was not supposed to be there. But everybody was wondering if he's coming. It was like waiting for Cary Grant, you know. Is he coming? Is he not coming? And all of a sudden, the walls of Jericho opens up, and here comes President Johnson with cameras in back of him, you know. He puts his arm on the rostrum. He actually, I swear to God, crossed my heart and hoped to die.
What really did happen? Could you relive quickly and briefly, if you're tired of telling it, that fateful day in Washington when you went to the White House and Lady Bird Johnson invited you, among others, to sit and talk?
Well, I got an invitation from Mrs. Johnson that said, why is there so much juvenile delinquency in the streets of America? Now, this was 1968. And it was because of some work that I have been doing and continuously doing, working with the underprivileged children in all areas of the world. In New York, and now also with an organization called Kidsville in Los Angeles. And in Washington, when I was there with the Owl and the Pussycat, I was involved with a group called Rebels with a Cause, who came to my dressing room at the National Theater and asked me to be their spokesman because Washingtonians do not have representatives, so to speak. And I went around Washington and I saw what they were showing me, the poverty-stricken areas that had been built in 1937 that hadn't even been paved, and people were living in very squalid conditions and not even hot water. And they showed me what was happening to the poverty money, which was not being used quite properly. And we were responsible for getting something like 5 areas of Washington cleaned up within about 2 years' time. So when I got the invitation, it was because Hubert Humphrey had referred me to Mrs. Johnson because of the kind of work that I have been doing, and also the fact that in each country that I travel into, the boys who had been running away from America because they did not want to be involved in the Vietnamese War, because they feel that we should not have been involved in the Vietnamese War, would also come to my dressing room and tell me what their feelings were. And when I got the invitation, why there is so much juvenile delinquency in the streets of America, I raised my hand because all of the things that were being said to me were not very constructive.
This is there in the White House now.
Yes. They were saying things like, well, when I see a little boy about to throw a stone, we walk over to him and tap him on the shoulder and say, you mustn't do that. Or we feel that, these are what women were saying, that we should build bigger street lights so if we are going to be attacked that we can at least see who is attacking us. And we should put bigger flower pots on the windows of the ghettos of America. And it was absolutely nonsense to me. I said, I thought, when I raised my hand finally, Mrs. Johnson gave me the floor, and I asked her the question, don't you think we have missed out on something here this afternoon? I thought the question of the day was, why is there so much juvenile delinquency in the streets of America? Do you think it might not have something to do with our involvement in Vietnam? Because our boys feel that it does not pay to be good. If you are good and be brought up by the 10 Commandments, such as our parents have brought the children up, I'm a mother myself, you know the pains of bearing a child. Even though we only have girls, we still bear the pain, and the pain is very rewarding. And then the children get to an age where they are about to go out on their wings and practice the 10 Commandments, suddenly some foreign matter snatches them away from us and throws them off into a war that says thou shalt kill, thou shalt steal, thou shalt do everything against the 10 Commandments. Don't you think it might have something to do with our involvement in Vietnam? Well, I don't know how long I talked, but suddenly the room became extremely quiet.
No more mention of flower pots.
No. But when I sat down, it was also terribly interesting to me because the lady who was sitting to my right put her hand on my thigh and whispered to me with her head down. And this is a free democratic country that we're living in, right?
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be living in fear of our government. But with her head down, she whispered to me, "Thank you, Eartha, for saying what you're saying. We would all like to say the same thing, but unfortunately, most of our husbands work for Mr. Johnson." So a lot of those women who were there were not outsiders. They were in with Mrs. Johnson. So it was all like a propaganda for Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
It does take a lot of nerve to do what you did, however, whether you planned it ahead of time or it was a spontaneous
No, it was not
feeling
planned
of the moment. And
beforehand.
clearly it
You
was the
cannot
latter.
plan But within 2 hours after that luncheon, and it just took until 1975 for me to get this dossier, because I didn't even know it until 1975 that I was suddenly cut off from the American public.
Yes, your career took a conspicuous nosedive at that point, and just to film, a dossier was gotten. I believe Seymour Hersh of the Times called you, did he?
Yes, he did.
Or was it the Jack Anderson column, or both, in which you realized the extent to which they had been snooping?
Yes.
And was it dated after the White House incident?
The dossier says that 2 hours after the luncheon, President Johnson picked up the telephone and called across the nation networks and said, "I do not want to see that woman on the air."
Do you think that's true?
It's what's on the dossier.
Yeah.
And this is CIA and FBI.
Was he in the room to see this happen? Was he actually
No,
present?
it was
he?
reported to him afterwards. He was not. He came in, which was also terribly funny to me too, because the ladies were sitting around, were looking at the tablecloths and looking under the plates to see if they were Limoges or Dresden or whatever, and they were very concerned.
I truly believe that being a, light-skinned, exotic woman in America and loving your country and wanting what's best for your people is such an odd place to be. I mentioned this in one of my other videos where, I was having this conversation with some friends and family and, putting them on to, I'm watching Chrissy's videos. I'm figuring out all the weird stuff they do with casting when it comes to like black women and how we're being erased. And I'm on my kick. Like, I'm wearing my cape. And someone tells me, like, that you would be like a house nigga, right? Like, why are you doing all this ranting and raving when you wouldn't even be in that position? Like, you know what I mean? And it's just such a weird place to be, to want to do what's best for your country. But even in Black America, you're told you're not black enough and you're not this enough and you're not that enough, to the point to where her own country blackballed her and she couldn't make a career, in her country. Her own people didn't support her. It's awful. But as they say, God works in very mysterious ways. And throughout her career, she was able to use her being, 5 times lingual, whatever that is at this point, and picking up on all these different cultures, living in all these different places outside of the States, and incorporating that into her music, where she has the songs as one, where she's speaking Dutch and German and French all in the same song, to where no matter where her music charted, everyone in the world enjoyed it. And her being multicultural ended up being the best thing that ever happened to her. So her being kicked out of the States, that ended up working out for her in the best of ways.
I've posed for pictures with ivory soap. I've petted stray dogs and shied clit of dope. My smile is brilliant, my glance is tender, but I'm noted most for my unspoiled agenda. I've been made Miss Rheingold, though I never touch beer. And I'm the person to whom they say, "You're sweet, my dear." The only etchings I've seen have been behind glass, and the closest I've been to a bar was at ballet class. Prim and proper, the girl who's never been kissed. But I'm tired of being pure and not chaste. Like something that shakes its level. I wanna go to the devil, I wanna be evil. I wanna spit tax. I wanna be evil and cheat at jacks. I wanna be wicked. I wanna tell lies. I wanna be mean and throw mud pies. I want to wake up in the morning with that dark brown taste. I wanna see some dissipation in my face. I wanna be evil. I wanna be mad. But more than that, I wanna be bad. I wanna be evil and trump an ace just to see my partner's face. I wanna be nasty. I wanna be cruel. I wanna be daring. I wanna shoot pool. And in the theater, I want to change my seat just so I can step on everybody's feet. I wanna be evil. I wanna hurt flies. I wanna sing songs like the guy who cries. I wanna be hard. I wanna drink booze. And whatever I've got, I am eager to lose. I wanna be evil, little evil me, just as mean and evil as I can be.
That was one of my absolute favorite songs of hers. And, you know, after this time in her life, when she had got divorced and her daughter became her best friend, she named her daughter Kit. Her name that she grew up by was Eartha May. But when she became Eartha Kitt, it was more like an alter ego. Think about like Marilyn Monroe. And these two women actually brushed paths once upon a time. And they had this instant connection that they were kindred spirits and that they were both, a lot much more sensitive girls than people realized because they were both sex symbols. And I think the only difference with Marilyn, and Eartha also agreed with this, is that Marilyn had a hard time separating Norma Jean from Marilyn Monroe. And I think ultimately that's why, her life became what it became. But Eartha, she always knew that the name on the marquee, as she would call it, wasn't who she really was. Marilyn, she would have these moments where she would be so upset. She would say, they're going to find out that it's not real, that I'm fake, that I'm a fraud. And she wasn't aware of how amazing she was on and off the screen. She felt like she had to be the name on the marquee. And she had a hard time, knowing the difference between the two, whereas Eartha did not. She was very self-aware of her identity and what people expected of her, to the point to where she named her daughter Kit. And she would say, I'm Eartha, this is Kit, and we're a team. And later on in life, Eartha's daughter, Kit Shapiro, she actually became Eartha's manager, and they did everything together. She lived a lot through her daughter, and it reminded me of her relationship with her mother and how, she would have done anything to be underneath her mother's bosom for the rest of her life. So she gave that opportunity to her daughter. And, some kids are superstars. They always try to reject certain things, and, they always want to complain about their parents and stuff like that. But her daughter was very humble, has her head on straight, a very, a good girl. You could tell she really loves her mother and will do anything for her, and had no problem, being there with her mother through everything. They did everything together. And this freedom and this support, allowed her to express herself in so many different ways when it comes to her music. And a lot of us know her from, I think about the Batman 90s animated series. I think about Emperor's New Groove. She played Esma. I think about the movie Hose. She played Madame Zeroni. So this was like, the golden era in her life where she tried new things now that she finally had the support of a family member. She always said that, her mother gave her up and everyone pushed her away because of her skin tone and things like that, that the people, the audience were her only family. So once she finally had someone that was her flesh and blood, it changed things for her. And we got all of the iconic films and music that we know and love today. And I'm going to share some with you guys that is my personal favorites.
But if you forget to come back for Madame Zeroni, you and your family will be cursed for always and eternity. Yes, my dear. You will make a perfect pinafore. The type of garment no one will recognize you in or as. If you should pardon a final cutting remark.
To do one. And to work with a great voice like Eartha Kitt's voice is also fantastic.
So, to destroy our beloved traditions, this act of highest treason has but one punishment: death. Guards! Take him away!
I'll turn him into a flea. A harmless little flea. And then I'll put that flea in a box. And then I'll put that box inside of another box. And then I'll nail that box to myself. And when it arrives, I'll smash it with a hammer. It's brilliant, 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 I tell you. Genius, I say.
I definitely enjoyed seeing this part of her career when, you know, she had her daughter and she was just being more creative and stuff like that. There's actually a story of her in France. She was still living in France at the time, still being, you know, blackballed by Americans. But her and her daughter, who is white passing, and they were at this amusement park, and, you know, the first couple of days she wasn't feeling well, so only the daughter went. But today she wanted to get on the rides with her daughter, and they tell her that, you know, these rides are whites only, so your daughter can get on, but you can't. And the daughter, you know, she was so upset, rightfully so, that she wanted to, you know, scream and kiss and, you know, cuss and, you know, all this other stuff, and was really upset. And Eartha told her, no, like, now's not the time. And the little girl goes, well, when will be the time? You know, this is awful. We shouldn't have to put up with this. And she says, I know, but not yet. And maybe like a week later, she's still in France, and she's doing this. You know, she did a lot of charity work. She did a lot of things for free. At this time in her life, you didn't have to pay to see her. If you guys were having an event, she would show up. And even if she was paid to do a concert, her ritual after each concert was to do some type of charity work to give back to her community. So she was at one of these events, and along comes the owner of the amusement park. And, you know, she says, so you're the guy that owns that amusement park over there, which was right behind her. And she points at all these, you know, contraptions and merry-go-rounds, whatever they call it, Ferris wheel, merry-go-round. And he says, yeah, I own that place. And she explains to him what happened to her. And he goes from white to red. It was a white guy. And he tells her, you know, that will never happen again. And she says, oh, so not only are you going to make it, you know, free to the general public, but you're also going to donate double what you came to originally donate and help us build another school, because that's what she was doing, building a school. And he says, yes, I'll do it. And she looks at her daughter and smiles and says, now's the time. And baby girl explains her situation, and this man who was only going to donate maybe $50,000 ended up donating triple, anything to get on Eartha's good side. It was a pleasure for him to be able to, you know, make up for that. And the next day they went to the amusement park, and all the whites only signs were taken down. So I definitely appreciate her advocacy work and her social justice work. And she wanted to be able to do this work in America, but unfortunately, you know, she was blackballed by the president at the time. But God works in funny ways. Later on in life, President Jimmy Carter invited her back to the White House and, you know, basically gave her this award and told her that she's an amazing American citizen and to welcome home, essentially. And after that, she was unblackballed from America, and she was able to work in her home country again. And she decided that even though she could afford to live anywhere in the world, she wanted to die on the soil that she was born on. And, you know, she really truly died an American patriot. And me being a black woman, sometimes people make me feel like I can't be proud of where I'm from and love my country. And it's disturbing. So the fact that she was able to do that before her life ended was amazing. And, you know, it's funny. You would think after all this time, people have matured and not been so, you know, weird when it comes to race. But to this day, people are bullying her daughter, telling her, well, you're probably adopted. You know how they do Michael Jackson's kids? Like, oh, you're white. You're not really, you know, you're adopted. They were essentially doing that to her. And she had to explain to people the way genetics work and that she's also a proud black woman. And yeah, so some things never change, unfortunately. But I really did enjoy making this video. She's definitely a muse of mine. I felt like I picked up on a lot of her energy, and I love it. So I'm going to share some more of my favorite music with you guys. And thank you for watching. Have a beautiful day.
81. Eartha Kitt, of course, had a legendary career in entertainment spanning over 6 decades. She was the first black woman to play Catwoman in the iconic 60s Batman series, and was immortalized in time for her iconic holiday song, Santa Baby, which has been streamed almost 200 million times on Spotify. Eartha Kitt was groundbreaking, to say the least. But even with all of her success in Hollywood, Eartha Kitt considered her greatest achievement being a mom. She and her daughter Kitt were incredibly close, and just a few months ago, their relationship took center stage when a TikTok post from Kitt went massively viral when she felt compelled to defend her identity. Here's why. The photo you see, take a look, that's Eartha and her biological daughter, Kitt. But because of the very different skin tones throughout Kitt's life, people have questioned whether or not they were really related. Here's some of the highly, I think, insensitive and hurtful comments Kitt received after that TikTok post where she mentioned she was Eartha's daughter. Some people said, "I'm confused. Wasn't Eartha Kitt black? Oh my gosh, I'm shocked. You're white. Biological daughter, question mark. I cannot be the only one with this question." In the past, Kitt says she has typically chosen not to address these types of comments with a response. But after a lifetime of what she calls pain and scrutiny, this summer, she'd had it. It was finally her time to speak up.
All right, so let's just address the obvious. There are many of you who question whether I am truly my mother's biological child, which is hurtful and insulting, especially since, there's a lot of people out there who don't look the way we think they should look. We have this predetermined idea on how a multiracial human being should appear. I am my mother's biological child. I do look like my mother for people who are willing to see past the blonde hair and the light skin. What can I say? Genetics are a peculiar thing.
Please welcome Kitt Shapiro to the Tan Fam! In order to look more Caucasian and pass white. I mean, these people were digging deep. It is amazing. I mean, people hide behind, as we all know, we've all been victims of some type of trolling or nastiness online, and people, they just assume that because you don't, as I mentioned in the TikTok, look the way they think you should look, then you can't possibly be who you say you are. Now, my mother only had one child, and this is what she got. And she actually loved the fact that I was this mutt, she said. She would say to me, "You either break every rule or you fill every quota." She said, "You're a walking United Nations." And I truly think that, she was proud. She was proud to be the parent of somebody that couldn't be easily identified, because she herself had been so stereotyped and so pigeonholed because of her skin color, obviously. I am, to the other extreme, sometimes, criticized because I'm not black enough, and I can't help the way that I was born. First, I mean, as you said, you're your mother's only child, and her great. I had the pleasure of meeting your mom when I was in local news in Chicago. Everything you saw on TV was the real thing. She was very authentic to her core. When did you first start to feel like, okay, people? When was the first time you heard somebody say, "Is that your mom?" Well, you have to realize, when I was born, my mother was already very famous. Yes. And people are more impressed by fame than worried about race. So, they were more impressed that, Eartha Kitt had walked in the room than they were thinking, a woman of color had walked in the room. So, there was a lot that wasn't said. That was, you were accepted on a different level when your parent is a famous person. Right. So, that, I didn't really hear of it. My mother often talked about, how, she would always talk about the fact that, how beautiful I was. She was my mother, let's remember that. And I am her only child. And how wonderful it is to have, this mixed race, and how mixed race people are so much, more interesting. No offense to anyone who's not, but I think there's one thing I think we should all be able to take a DNA test from birth, because we all would realize how much more mixed up we are. Oh boy. When was the first time you remember hurting? Well, it wasn't really until social media became a thing. So it's after my mother passed. And I had somebody it must have been on Facebook, or it was a response to a blog. I have a blog. And it was in response to, "You can't possibly be her biological child. She obviously lied to you her entire life, and you were clearly adopted." To which my response was, "When do you think
I'm just an old-fashioned girl with an old-fashioned mind. Not sophisticated, I'm the sweet and simple kind. I want an old-fashioned house with an old-fashioned fence and an old-fashioned millionaire. I'd like a plain, simple car, a cerise Cadillac, long enough to put a bowling alley in the back. I want an old-fashioned house with an old-fashioned fence and an old-fashioned millionaire. I'll stay weaving at my loom, be no trouble to my groom if he'll keep the piles of money mountain. In our cottage there will be a soundproof nursery, not to wake the baby while I'm counting. I like the old-fashioned flowers, violets are for me. Have them made in diamonds by the man at Tiffany. I want an old-fashioned house with an old-fashioned fence and an old-fashioned millionaire. just a pilgrim at heart, oh so pure and genteel. Watch me in Las Vegas when I'm at the spinning wheel. I want an old-fashioned house with an old-fashioned fence and an old-fashioned millionaire. I'll ask for such simple things when my birthday occurs. 2 apartment buildings that are labeled hers and hers. I want an old-fashioned house with an old-fashioned fence and an old-fashioned millionaire. I like Chopin and Bizet and the songs of yesterday, string quartets and Polynesian carols. But the music that excels is the sound of oil wells as they slurp, slurp, slurp into the barrels. Our little home will be quaint as an old parasol, and instead of carpets I'll have money wall to wall. I want an old-fashioned house with an old-fashioned fence and an old-fashioned millionaire.